Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I call the meeting to order. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To
to
the
the
flag
flag of the United States
States
of
of
America,
America, and to the republic
for which
for which it
it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with
with liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice for all. Thank you. Can we have a roll call, please? Kim?
Trustee Benson,
Here.
Trustee Gunther,
Here.
Pro Tem Jackson,
Here.
Trustee Mead,
Present.
Trustee Pelfrey,
Here.
Trustee Varan,
Here.
President Awar.
Here. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comments. Any public comments, Matt? Do you see anybody?
Let me check here. Okay. Yep. So for public comments, anybody that is a visitor, if you'd like to make a public comment, there is the raise hand function if you are using the application, or *9 on your phone if you are calling in from the phone. I see Don Hanson's there. Go ahead, Don.
Go ahead, Don. Go ahead, Don. Did you lose him, Matt?
Nope. Let me see here.
Can you
There
hear
we
me?
go. Yep, we hear
Yeah.
you.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Don.
We have a situation, Breedsville, they've requested annexation in Columbia Township, but we've never heard from the township. If they would have handled it like Decatur Township and Decatur Village, it would be very smooth operation. We always like to have both elected officials, boards agree, and then we certainly will agree with them to do the annexation, but we haven't had that situation. So you've set a really good precedent for them to follow. We would hope they would follow Decatur Township. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Anyone else?
I do not see anybody else.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, we have the consent agenda, additions, deletions to the agenda. Is there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Okay, you said you have correction, Matt, for
Yes, in the minutes, for the December meeting, it would be item 7B for water rates. We have a nay listed there, but in the description, under ayes, it looks like we had, Kim Gunther was under the yes section, but she actually voted no. So it should be no with Gunther and then 5-1. So we'll fix that before we finalize it.
Okay, so so then the minutes from, and then if there is no other things, if there is nothing, no additions, deletions, and no other changes, so I need a motion to approve the agenda as is. Approval and the minutes from the December 7, 2020 regular meeting with the correction that Matt is mentioning, and bills in a total of $137,628.13.
I'll make a motion to
approve as amended.
Okay, Trustee Varan, and who's the second?
I'll second it.
Trustee Mead, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Okay, motion carried. The next item on the agenda is officer reports. We have the village attorney report, DPW report, chief's report, clerk treasurer report, and village manager's report. Any questions from the council in regard to these reports? Any questions?
I'll share a couple things.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So obviously with the COVID-19 situation, we continue to monitor that. And I'm glad to see us into the new year. I'm hoping that 2021 will be quite a bit different with respect to that situation, but probably I would say for at least the first quarter, maybe into the middle of the year, we'll probably still see some challenges with it, but we're making some progress. I am happy to report that I believe it was 4 out of 5 officers. It might be 5 out of 5 by now, but our police department and public works are part of the phase 1B vaccination group. So Chief actually did a really great job in reaching out to the health department for Van Buren County and coordinating with them. So I believe, if not all 5 now, within the next week, I would anticipate we'd have all 5 of our police department with the first round of vaccinations. And then we're working on getting public works into that same round as well. At the end of the day, I think with the PD, their probably level of interaction with the public is probably even a bit more extensive than public works. So I think of all of us, the PD is probably the most on the front line. So I'm happy to see that process evolving and them getting that taken care of. We probably will make a little bit of an adjustment. I alluded to it partly in the meeting, but as part of the CARES Act, there was the additional COVID leave bank that was created. That originally, I think, would have gone through December 31st, and then we're planning to continue that through March 31st. But kind of our logic at this point would be having that tied in to the vaccine program as well. So essentially, as soon as the vaccine would become available to our staff members, then that COVID leave would disappear if they elect to not go forward with the vaccine. Now, the one caveat there would be obviously any valid medical reasoning. So if somebody went to a doctor and had a note to say, hey, I can't take it for this reason, that would be fine. And then the other thing would be is with any vaccine for COVID, either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, there's actually 2 rounds. So I think after the first round, it's roughly 50% immunity. And then I think after the second one, it's like 95, 94%, somewhere in that vicinity. So, and I think that takes up to 10 days after the fact. So even during that process, if somebody did happen to still get sick or there were any issues, we would still honor that. For the remainder of the staff, essentially, if you have a choice for a vaccine and then choose not to, we're not going to force anybody to do it. But if you make the decision to not get the vaccine, then it would be up to you at that point for your own personal sick time banks to utilize that time off should you have to quarantine or get illness. So we figured that was kind of a good middle ground to encourage people to get the vaccine, but not get to a point where we're mandating it. We just didn't feel comfortable with everything being so new to do that. As far as DPW goes, I'm happy to report that we're back at full strength with Public Works. Patrick Alex Boitnott joined our team as of December 28th. So I hope you all join me in welcoming him to our staff. He lives right here in the village and brings a great skill set with him to his role here with us. All in all, of course, we've seen some turnover in DPW this fiscal year, but I think our new staff is starting to settle in pretty well, and I think we're in a good spot for the future. I had emailed you guys about this throughout December, but we did have an issue where a small amount of water, I think when I looked into this, it was about 3/4 of a cup. So not a large amount, but it just happened that it came in through a conduit, electrical conduit, leaked back down into where our basement area is. And we've been working on our networking project that's pretty much complete now. But one piece of equipment that we were planning to replace down the line as soon as Comcast had gotten everything squared away was our phone system. We have an old system that's getting up there in age now, and we've been trying to work on getting that replaced with something that had some added features and allowed us a little more flexibility, particularly during times like this. And unfortunately, we found out that after that water leaked in, it took out our local phone system. So none of our desk phones worked. And we worked with Comcast to try to find a solution where basically we could ring the PD cell phone and the office staff cell phones in addition to our normal phones. So that ended up allowing us to still make calls and things, but didn't address the issue. So we tried to finally say, hey, we've been working with you guys since February on getting the phone system going. What can we do? And they came back and said it was going to be 60 days. So that was a non-starter for us. So we requested an exception and said, you guys had plenty of time. At this point, we really need to take our business elsewhere. So we were able to take all of our village lines, except for, I think, our fax, and port those over to a different provider. We didn't have any early termination fees or anything under the circumstances. So we actually now use Zoom phone. So it's actually the same provider for our webinars. And it actually worked out pretty well. There's a lot of nice features where we can actually take calls through the app on our phones. You can actually call right on your computer if you have a headset attached. And it actually syncs up right with our desktop phones. And we've got some new desktop phones that work really well also. And so actually, we've been really happy with that. And quite frankly, one of the things I'm excited about is part of the reason we were renewing with Comcast was that we had a longer term contract. And so the idea was, well, we're not going to spend thousands to get out of this. What can we do in terms of our existing service to make this work for us? So we were going to sign a modification. Unfortunately, while we had a bit of an issue there for about 10 days, it did result in us being able to change that service. And to be quite honest, we had all the features we wanted to through what we were going to upgrade with Comcast, but it's about $90 a month cheaper than what it would have been in that service. So I'm happy with that too, actually, because it saves us money. We have been working with Whiteman on a new grant opportunity for the village. The grant, if awarded, would cover the full cost, so that'd be 100% of the full inventory that we have to complete for lead and copper rules to ascertain the condition of all service lines within the village. So essentially, Jimmy worked on, there's kind of an initial distribution system materials inventory we completed at the end of last year, where you put down what known issues you have, what unknowns there are, and work to try to figure out, okay, well, with those unknowns, how do we figure out what needs to be replaced and what doesn't? We had actually had a lot of discussions on what this would look like, who would be responsible for this, how this might work. As part of the water program that the state had announced, this was one of those, and Whiteman and Mickey in particular reached out to us in the middle of December and highlighted this program, put in a lot of work for us on getting this squared away. If the grant was awarded, it'd be approximately $767,000. That application was submitted last week, and we haven't heard anything yet, but we'll let you guys know as soon as we do. Again, big thanks to Mickey and the team at Whiteman for working with us on this and helping us make sure we got the application in on time and ready to go for a chance at the grant here. Yeah, I really think that long term, as we look at the lead and copper rules, obviously outside of the service replacements, this is going to be one of the big expenses we had wondered, and how are we going to have the manpower to do this. So if this helps and we're able to utilize a third party and actually not even incur the cost, that would be huge. So we'll see what happens there. The USDA bond applications for water and sewer are progressing as well. We've got a few things that we have to work on in terms of some preliminary numbers and reports that we have to provide Whiteman so we can get everything squared away, but we're working through that process. On the village side, the couple things we have to work on is getting bond counsel set up, and then we have to have financial advising set up as well. So we're reaching out to some different providers now to try to get that in place. We also have to have some USDA logins and things that they actually have to verify identities and things. So I had to put in my social security number and answer a bunch of questions to verify I was me to be able to even sign stuff. But we're getting that process done. So we should have everything ready to go in the next couple of months. And I'll give you guys an update as we get there. And then the last thing I'll provide an update on is outside of the phones, everything else in terms of our networking infrastructure here was completed. So it's a pretty stark difference. We went from a lot of miscellaneous cables running around and a 100 megabit per second internet or network service here to a fully gigabit service around the village. We have everything all networked together, so we can actually see all of the different devices that are connected. Our Wi-Fi was expanded. We had to run some cables to make everything work. We have a rack mounted where all of our equipment now is in one place that's secured with a key. So I think all in all, it's exactly what we had envisioned when we talked about the upgrade initially, and it took a little while for us to get there, but I'm really happy with how it's all turned out, and I think into the future, this will be something that will serve us well for quite some time. And I think the other thing, I touched on this briefly when we talked about it in the budget last year, but I believe that doing it internally, we did actually save quite a bit of money as well. A good example would be, I think we had 3 different cable runs we had to put in place because there were some cables that ran to some of the offices that weren't compliant with what we were trying to do with the network. And I think those alone would have been about on the order of about $750 to $1,000 per cable run. So that was about $1,500 to $2,000 if we'd have contracted out just that portion. So altogether, I think we're in a good place. And networking wise, we have everything all set to go. And I don't foresee us having to make any adjustments there for at least probably 5 years.
Okay. Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
you guys, I know you and Kim and Evelyn do a good job, of maintain, the the physical distance, for the COVID and the masks and all that stuff. Are you
Yes.
are you reevaluating your decision and working from home and start working?
Yeah, actually, we stopped doing that, at least in part, the middle of December. So right when that kind of pause had taken place, we had
Yeah.
transitioned more to working remotely outside of, essential tasks. So things like payroll, processing payments, etc. So we were only in for short times. Now we actually are on a rotationary schedule where one of us is in the office every day during our open hours. So whether it's Kim, Evelyn, or me, we're all taking turns right now doing that to make sure one of us is here. We may look as we get to the middle of this month, end of this month, we might look to trying to bring all three of us back. But one of the things we're trying to work on is MIOSHA has a rule now. That's part of where a lot of this stems from, is that, for work that can be done remotely, you should. And that runs through April. So, we looked at what a lot of other communities were doing and talked to some other individuals. And I asked the MME group about it. And we ended up deciding that we felt that transitioning back to having at least somebody here every day was the right course. And I think some of it, the vaccine schedules, things like that, some of that will play a factor as well. But yeah, we do have somebody here every day. And I would think we're going to continue to evaluate that as time goes by. I would think probably towards the middle of this month or end of the month here, we'll look at that again and figure out.
From what I see, you have a plenty of space over there. So, between you and Kim and Evelyn. So rethink that, so I would like to
And-
see you. Go ahead.
We can. It's just it would. We're trying to comply with MIOSHA as part of the challenge. I mean,
Well, and Matt, and I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there, because I think it's when you can't socially distance that you kind of have to work remotely, but I think we have plenty of room up there for 3 people. And I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Next item on the agenda is fiscal year 2022 proposed budget.
yeah. So obviously the caveat here is that this is, of course, a draft. Obviously, to give you guys a peek at what we're proposing for the fiscal year 22 budget. There will be probably some minor changes that come up as we go through it, but I'll kind of give the 20,000 foot view, and then if anybody has any further questions, of course we can go into something a little bit in more detail. So, like with most of our budgets, we start with kind of just a listing of the officers here at the time, for our council and our DPW, or excuse me, our department heads. Description of the major funds. So primarily that's going to be our general fund, road fund, DDA fund, our enterprise fund, so sewer, water, and garbage, and then our motor pool fund. And then I'll kind of touch on the narrative here specifically, because I think this kind of is a base for what we're going to see throughout the budget. But obviously, budgets like this require a team effort. So working with our department heads to try to figure out what are the needs of each department going forward, whether that's equipment, safety equipment, equipment to complete their jobs, supplies, etc., and projects, and then looking at that in kind of the broader context and saying, what does that look like in terms of our budget, and can we afford this? Can we afford that? Should this get put on hold? And so there's a lot of those discussions that take place in the lead up to the budget. In particular, as we look at fiscal year 2022, COVID-19 obviously has had a pretty dramatic impact on all levels of government. So we're not an exception there. There is the potential we could see revenue shortfalls still with Act 51 road funding, state shared revenues. We have some uncertainty with respect to property tax revenues. So in particular, that could be, if folks don't have the funds to be able to pay those property taxes, it might be something where you might not recover those costs until, a year or two down the line. So that could play a role as well. And then obviously the need for some of the expanded safety and health measures that we've had to do. Now, I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to build up a base of that equipment. So, I don't know that we have this astronomical amount of things that we'll have to get, but, masks, cleaning supplies, things like that will still probably continue on a little bit higher level than what we've seen, obviously pre-COVID-19. But despite the challenges, myself and department heads worked to evaluate each of the proposed expenditures for the departments, gauge those based on their overall need and the projected value to the community or our operations, and then work to ensure that the projects we were pursuing had the necessary value to impact ratio that we were seeking. It's always important to try to evaluate if a project, when you look at the costs and say, okay, how is this going to help operations, or what value is this going to have to the community that we serve? You always want to see something where there's going to be a large value that either makes operations easier or more streamlined or benefits the community. So, but I think in cases like this where you're looking at a tightening of the budget in some respects, it's even more important to make sure that we focus on those things and make sure the projects being pursued are those that are extremely important. Obviously, the other component here is working with the budget committee. So throughout this process, we work with the committee for input, feedback, and setting expectations for what we will incorporate in the budget. So the process this year was much the same. In addition to the department head feedback, we talked with the budget committee about a couple different things. So it kind of goes a little bit in different stages, but we look at wages and benefits, capital improvement plans that were proposed. So that takes into account, feedback from department heads, as well as things in our asset management plans for, say, sewer and water, parks plan, things like that. And then incorporating those into a draft line item budget, and then figuring out, okay, well, with that draft budget, how does that look? And does everybody agree with where we're headed here? And then based on feedback from the budget committee, then we make additional changes or forecast changes to the budget, or forecast changes, things like that, and then try to settle on a final budget. So the one thing I'll note, and we talked about this last year, I'll mention it again for our new council members, as well as kind of a reminder for our existing council members, is that starting last year and carrying on through this year, we do not use the accounts. The numbered accounts were 679.390. What it was a transfer from fund balance. So basically what it was an entry that showed up on the revenue side if we were going to be using money from the cash account at the bank. So for example, if we were planning to spend money on a sewer project, and that was going to be in excess of what we had planned in terms of revenues coming in for the year, then obviously you're going to overspend that particular revenue stream, and you're going to be using money from the bank. So what it used to be was it would show up as a revenue line item transfer from fund balance. But the challenge was I think in that instance, it showed that transfer was happening, but then the actual effect on the budget was that it didn't really show in the beginning and ending fund balance numbers. So by eliminating this, it actually allows us to show a more accurate picture, and you can see the positive or negative effects under net revenues and appropriations. So a positive entry is revenues forecasted in excess of expenses. Negative would be obviously the opposite, where you're using the fund balance. Again, so the goal was increased transparency with all of this. And the one thing that I would note is that the use of the fund balance is not inherently in and of itself a negative thing. Obviously, we have a fiduciary responsibility to all of the village residents to use our funds appropriately. So this can mean several things. So obviously, ensuring we have adequate fund balance to safeguard against economic downturns, as we've seen somewhat with COVID-19, as well as ensuring that meaningful projects are pursued that those funds use. So the goal is to find a healthy balance, obviously, between spending on meaningful projects and ensuring that we have appropriate fund balance levels to safeguard against fluctuations that can occur there. The other change from prior years was the capitalization policy. That threshold was changed from $1,000 to $5,000. We undertook that from guidance from the auditors as well as the state of Michigan. Moving that threshold has the effect of decreasing recordation requirements. So bookkeeping is a little bit more closely aligned with the cash basis type system. You have a smaller list of fixed assets that you have to physically track and audit. And in general, it makes the process much easier and simpler for the staff, as well as in review and presentation in our annual financial statements as well. So as we had done last year and then now continued into this year, some expenditures that would have been previously listed under capital outlay would now appear in other accounts such as supplies, equipment purchase, et cetera, because they wouldn't meet that $5,000 threshold. One change that we're making for this year, and we talked about this with the presentation from Gabbridge and Company when Matt was here for the audit, was that in prior years, expenditures would provided services into future years were expensed into a prepaid expense account. So basically the way this would work is if we had, say, for example, software, and that software applies to the first 3 months of this year and then 9 months of the following year. What you would do in that case under the old system is you would expense it to, say tech services for this year for 3 months, and then you'd post a prepaid expense to an asset account that you then have to reverse at the start of the next year. So that's really one of the challenges, is that when you expense things like this, you have to track all those prepaid expenses, reverse them at the start of every year, and from a practical standpoint, the actual cash that gets expensed does come out right when you make that expense. So if we're prepaying for tech services, say BSNA software, for example, we're paying that full amount at the time that we sign that contract and renew the software. So even though we had only expensed 3 months of it and put the rest of it into prepaid expense, from a bookkeeping perspective, from an actual cash basis, that money was already spent. So one of the advantages, and they talked about this again at the audit presentation, is that instead of doing it that way, you can actually expense that whole amount at the time that expense is incurred. That's quite a bit simpler way of doing it. It's a lot easier to track. It reduces the need to actually track prepaid expenses, assets there for reversals. And then I think the other advantage is that it brings the budget more in line with a cash basis. So rather than seeing these assets of prepaid expenses, what you're seeing in terms of fund balance numbers and estimated expenses are all a little bit more in line. So I do think that actually is a quality adjustment and will make things quite a bit easier for everybody going forward. So all applicable expenses that would have been previously attributable to prepaid expense are now expensed in full to the appropriate accounts. So I probably won't go through each one individually here, but overall, the fiscal year 22 budget is relatively consistent with fiscal year 21. We did project about a 1.2, 1.3% reduction in appropriations across all funds. So this is going to fluctuate a little bit from department to department and fund to fund. So I guess I'll kind of touch on just a couple of these. With Village Council, one of the changes is that we had initially planned on installing a projector to enable us to do presentations and things. We originally planned to do that this year, but with everything with COVID-19, we decided to put that on hold. And I don't know that right now there's a big need for that moving into fiscal year 2022. So, I mean, it's certainly something we'd like to see, but we felt that our funds were better used in other avenues. So we have decided to maybe pursue that for fiscal year 23. Tech services was increased to account for the use of agenda software in Office 365, and the audit was increased as well. For the attorney, we just did a minor adjustment based on what we've seen in the past. My office will see a bit of an increase. Primarily, that's due to me getting married. So there's the addition of my spouse to healthcare coverage. So that's really the biggest difference. The other difference would be there's actually a reduction in supplies from my office, and then there would be an increase in tech services. And that is primarily due to the way that we're doing prepaid expenses, mostly for BSNA and the email system. Village clerk and treasurer should remain relatively flat outside of adjustments for wages. Again, we saw an increase with tech services for that prepaid expense item I was talking about, and then a decrease to supplies. As calendar year 21 is not an election year, we don't have any election charges forecast. The village hall budget will see a slight decrease. Most of that is because part of our networking project actually involved the use of the village hall department. With the elimination of, or the completion of that project, we don't have any capital outlay there, so that'll see a reduction. The police department budget will see a slight increase. One of the biggest factors there would be the new collective bargaining agreement. So that encompasses primarily wages and benefits. The PD actually hadn't seen an increase in wages from what their bargained agreement was, I think, for about 2 years. There were some minor adjustments, I think, based on the number of years of service, but we hadn't done a whole large change to the whole structure in quite some time. So that was done. And then health insurance will see a bit of an increase due to some additional officers that are going to be added to the village healthcare plan. And then we do have some capital outlay there that will be under the capital improvement plan, which I'll discuss later. We don't foresee any changes with crossing guards. With the building inspection department, I've talked to Safe Built. We've got everything set to go. I think they're appearing in front of the the state of Michigan Board of Construction sometime later this month. Then we should have everything set to go there. The way that that essentially works is that all of the costs for building and permit services are actually borne by Safe Built and then paid by the residents. So there's really no cost to the village. There's no revenues that come from it either, because essentially all the costs are passed along to the residents and then they pay Safe Built in full. So the advantage to the village, though, is that we can offer a unified system where, for whether you need electrical, plumbing, mechanical, building, etc., all of that is all under the same umbrella. So it's a lot easier system than what they have now. We did still budget $1,000 for code enforcement activities as part of that Safe Built agreement. They do offer code enforcement services at our discretion. So if we have an issue, in particular, buildings would be the primary one here. Blight and other matters will still be handled locally as much as we can. But if there's something that comes up where there's a property maintenance code question or something like that, we can utilize Safe Built for that, and that's just on a as needed basis. For public works, everything should remain fairly stable. I think we had a slight reduction there. Part of that simply just comes from the way that FICA and Medicare costs will be expensed, much like we do with the manager in the clerk's office. We're moving to a system where FICA and Medicare would be out of the same allocation as their primary pay funds, so that would be water and sewer. And then Parks and Recreation will see a slight reduction, primarily because we're not forecasting any major projects for fiscal year 2022. Obviously, this past year, repairs were completed to the roofs of both the Red Wolf Park and Tennis Park pavilions. We are forecasting an increase in supplies and maintenance in line with the Parks and Recreation plan. So some of that's going to be revamping grills that need help, looking at bathroom facilities, making sure those have everything they need. So we are increasing those funds to try to accommodate that. For major road funds, we're going to see a big reduction, primarily due to the fact that the South William Street project occurred in fiscal year 21. So that was a large expense that was budgeted there. Obviously, without pursuing that project, that takes a lot off of the budget. Engineering expenses have been increased in the budget for major roads to account for the work that will be completed in advance of Prairie Ronde. That project, I believe, is slated for fiscal year 23. With that, I guess just to give a brief overview, and Mickey was talking to me about this not too long ago, is that I think there's quite a few extra things, especially when you're looking at a widening of a road slightly, that you actually have to call in archaeological services to investigate and see if there's any issues with expanding that area, or they find any archaeological artifacts and things in that area. We don't anticipate that based on what we've seen in that area and looking at the history of the community, but you never know. But at any rate, one of the big reasons for starting a lot of those sorts of things in advance is if you run into something, you have time to be able to account for that and make any necessary changes. If you wait too long, you run into problems where you may not be able to adapt to that. And so some of those environmental reviews, things like that, we want to get done in advance so that when we're able to bid that project and get it obligated, we're able to do that very quickly. Our capital outlay will cover some of the costs of our calendar year 21 local road projects. Those would be primarily the work that will be done to Sherwood Street and St. Mary Street, as was detailed in our pavement asset management plan. We don't forecast much in the way of changes for traffic services and snow removal. Only change I can see for snow removal is we increased material slightly, but that may depend. We actually had ordered a pretty decent amount of salt for this year. Depending on what this winter looks like, we may not have to see that increase. We were just trying to make sure, looking at the last couple years, what we see and make sure that we didn't under budget for salt supplies. So I think we're in a good spot. And if anything, we might end up seeing actually a lower cost than what we would see there, hopefully. The administration side sees an increase. That's primarily due to the forecasting of a single audit that we'll have to complete as part of the federal funds that are used for South William Street. And I believe actually that with the CARES Act funding, that comes up as well. So with that, there's essentially a separate audit process that you have to do whenever you use federal funds. So we've accounted for that here with both major and local roads. With local roads, we'll see a reduction in overall costs. Part of that is because of the way with the mix of projects for calendar year 21, more of that work is attributed to the major roads as was opposed to this year in terms of the local road projects at least. We are forecasting approximately 50,000 in capital outlay for local road projects, and I believe we'll see more projects come up in fiscal year 23. Salvage vehicle fund should remain relatively flat. We aren't forecasting any changes there. For the streets fund, we've had some changes here, and we've talked about it last year, and I think we started this discussion the year before, but basically we have a new system now where funds are only transferred from streets to either local or major as needed. It used to be that we automatically transferred those funds whenever we received them, but we worked with the auditors on this and determined that we didn't have to do that. In fact, it makes more sense to only do that when you need to, because once you move money to local or major roads, there's a lot less flexibility. Granted, I think our compliance plan with the pavement asset management plan might negate some of that, but I still think this is the best way to go. But we are forecasting transferring, I believe it's 125,000 from streets to major road to build up the fund balance there. Now, the other option would be is we probably could cancel the CD that we have set up for local roads right now, but I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. I mean, we're not going to see much in the way of road projects until early next year, and we have the funds available in the streets account. So I think even with that 125,000 transfer, there will still be a net revenue over expense. So I think this makes sense. And the only thing I guess I'll mention with this part is we are looking at the local road fund now. I think from the cash summary, we might have, I don't think it's negative, but we might need to adjust our local road funds or make a transfer from streets this year. We're going to do some budget amendments or propose those for February's meeting. Kim and I will take a look at that and make sure that we propose whatever adjustments are necessary there. If we do that, that will probably have an impact here as essentially say we transferred 65,000 from streets to local roads in February, we'll probably reduce this amount to, 60, that offset that amount. I think the thing of it is we just want to make sure that as we go into the end of the year and the audit that we don't have, a CD that's positive, but an actual fund balance that would be or a cash account that would be negative. So, altogether we have money in local roads now, but just for accounting purposes, we may look to make a change earlier. For business and home rehab loans, we didn't see any big changes. With business loans, it was just an increase to the loan draw. DDA fund remains relatively consistent. The only change there would be a reduction in projected revenues for DDA taxes. For the sewer fund, again, minor adjustments for the administration. For sewer line maintenance, that will see a pretty big increase. This is due to the capital projects that we have specified in our sewer asset management plan, and you'll see those in the capital improvement plan in a minute. Additionally, there were some carryover projects we initially planned for fiscal year 21 that were put on hold with COVID. So those will then be completed in fiscal year 2022. Maintenance lift station department will see an increase in its budget also for fiscal year 21. So much like with sewer maintenance, it's largely due to capital projects that are forecasted as part of the sewer asset management plan. We did make some adjustments here to salaries, benefits related accounts, and then electric based on prior year analysis as well. The collections department will see an increase in its budget. Primarily, the biggest reason for that is the proposed addition of a part-time office staff member for fiscal year 2022. So obviously we've got Kim, Evelyn, and I, but the goal here would be to add a part-time office member that could work with us and start learning some of what Evelyn does out there in the office, helping us with filing, answering phones, etc. So I think it's important for us to start looking at that and trying to plan ahead. So we felt that having a part-time office staff member that could start to come in and learn the ropes would be a helpful thing and would make that process smoother as we get to it. And then we again had an increase in tech services primarily due to the BSNA costs and the way the change was with prepaid expense. Water fund for administration and collection, again, slight increases based on wage adjustments. With the collection department, again, the primary driver there would be the addition of a part-time office staff member. The distribution department will see an increase. This is due to an adjustment in salaries based on looking at the prior years and determining if we were budgeting the correct amount. And there's also an increase in tech services that we have forecasted with the addition of internet services at Public Works. So that's a project we started this year and we haven't been able to complete that. But once we do, they'll have internet service at the Public Works barn, and we will have a computer set up over there that'll allow them to interact a little bit more with our work order system as well as our mapping systems with ArcGIS, quite a bit easier. And that we are planning hopefully sometime late spring and somewhere in that region. And then we have some capital projects also as part of the water asset management plan. And then the wells and towers department will see a slight reduction. This is due in part to the completion of the water tower inspection we had done in fiscal year 21 and a reduction in related capital projects for fiscal year 22. Garbage collection remains roughly the same. The only adjustment I can think of was we had a slight increase in the contract amount that went into effect. I think it was in September. So we've adjusted the total revenues and expenditures based on that amount. And the one thing, I guess, the caveat here with waste and rubbish disposal is that, as we talked about last month, we are looking at issuing a new RFP for waste removal services. I believe I'll have that ready for you guys either next month or March. You know, we've got the contract doesn't expire until August, so we've got some time yet. But as we start to plan on that, some adjustments may happen as an outcome of that RFP. So I'm not sure what we're going to see in terms of pricing. The only pricing I have that I know is guaranteed is through August. So we may have to look at some sort of an amendment if pricing is substantially different than what we saw for this year. But, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For the motor pool fund, we'll see a decrease in the police department. Obviously, we purchased a new patrol vehicle this year as well as the watch guard system. So we aren't forecasting any vehicle acquisitions for next year. It'd probably be the following year. Public Works will see an increase in terms of the motor pool. We did have a skid steer loader that was added or that we had budgeted for originally for fiscal year 21. But we were looking at a used item and we never really found one that kind of fit exactly what we were looking for in terms of hours, age, things like that. And then we were looking at a replacement for the 1-ton dually truck. That's gotten to a point where I think it's a little over 20 years old, and we've tried to have the flatbed fixed, I think 3 or 4 different times. We've taken it to different vendors and they will not work on it because they say there's not enough, you know, metal left to be able to actually fix things the way they'd like. So that vehicle's gotten to a point where we use that pretty extensively. So that's one that we'll have to replace. And then the administration side will see a slight increase just due to the wage adjustments. So with the capital improvements, I won't go through each one. I'll just kind of list off what they are, but we've got a water tapping machine planned, cleaning the exterior of the water tower. We have a coating of the lift stations for both number 1 and number 2, the wet wells there. A comminutor rebuild for lift station 1 that was actually part of the budget for last year. Recoat exposed piping and valves at lift station 1. Replace sanitary sewer crossboard by utility. I believe that is on, I don't remember what street it was. I think it was Seneca. We're not 100% sure if that's utility or if it's actually a water line, but either way, we want to make sure that that gets addressed. We have a few miscellaneous manhole repairs that were identified as part of the sewer asset management plan, and then there were some spot repairs as well. Those two projects will more than likely combine when we put out the RFP for it, so we'll try to reduce costs by combining those. Local road maintenance should come in at 160,000 split across local roads and major roads. Preliminary engineering for Prairie Ron should come out to roughly 30,000, and we have closed circuit televising of the storm sewer system budgeted for 20,000. The PD, their server has actually gotten to a point the same where the village was this past year, where it's reached its end of life, and there are no updates that are going to be coming out for it after, I think it's about 5 months from now. And it's getting up there in age as well. So we're looking at a couple options. One of the things we may do is install a new server similar to what the village had, move that down to our networking cabinet where we have a lock and key there that takes it out of the police department and puts it in a secure location where we can restrict access to it. So I think that makes sense, but I would anticipate we'd see roughly about the same cost as what we saw with the village. So roughly about 6,000. Patrol rifles, handgun lights, and holsters. We're still working on those for this year, but one of the things that is kind of an odd offshoot of COVID was that working with our suppliers, rifles, handgun lights, and holsters became something that was a little more difficult to procure, ammunition as well, as a matter of fact. So we're trying to see if we can get those things before the year expires. If they do, then we may not need this item in the budget, but we're trying to plan just in case that doesn't happen. We have a bathroom renovation planned for the police department. I note that this is kind of an estimated guess. We haven't gotten any quotes on this yet. Obviously, when we go down this road, we'll get quotes and bring those to the council, but with the PD bathroom, we haven't seen a renovation there in quite some time. So some of the basic things would be upgraded divider walls, paper towel dispensers, soap dispensers, things along those lines. But one of the big things that we started to realize, particularly with COVID, was the lack of a shower facility for our police officers. As most of you know, depending on the shift and what an officer might run into, there certainly could be times where being able to take a shower at the conclusion of your shift before putting on your street clothes and heading back home would be helpful. There's I'm not going to list them all, but there's a plethora of different interactions where I certainly would see where an officer could find that extremely valuable. So we're going to explore that and see. Again, if the costs come in crazy high, that's something we can put off to a later year if necessary. But we'll get quotes. We'll bring it to you guys and see what we can do. DPW heating and lighting upgrade. I realize I have a quick correction I have to make there. It says 15,000, but there's an extra zero there. So I'll fix that in the final copy. But with DPW, the biggest thing there is we've got some heaters that are relatively old and inefficient. So they aren't necessarily keeping some of the equipment bays quite as warm as we would like. So we want to explore whether there's more efficient options for that. And then most of the lighting would be fluorescent lighting. It's passable for day-to-day work, but we would like to try to see if we can eliminate some of the need for things like, work lamps and spotlights and stuff like that as we're working on equipment, and try to have just a better lighting setup in the facility as a whole. So Jimmy and I talked about this. We think there'd be a lot of value here. So we're looking at 15,000 for both projects. And the idea would be to coordinate that with Consumers Energy, AEP, and trying to find if we can find any rebate programs that would be a part of that. With the skid steer loader, that's listed here. I guess I skipped over one. The in-car computer replacements. Our police department vehicles have not had upgraded laptops there, or tough books really, I think it's been at least 8 years, maybe closer to 10. I know the county has basically told us those are also end of life and need to be replaced. So we're actually going to work together with the county on having them help us select what equipment would be good, partly because they do help us with the maintenance side of things there. And we want to try to get something that we think would work well and that they would recommend. So we got some early figures, and $7,000 should provide us enough to get everything we need to complete that part of the project. The skid steer loader, we budgeted, I believe it was 35 or 36 for this year. that was, again, something where we just weren't able to find the right piece. With the skid steer loader, that's actually going to do a lot for us in terms of what we're going to be using it for. There's obviously a number of different attachments you can use with it. We would like to see one with a bucket, forks, and chopper. But one of the other nice things about that is, whether you're looking at Sunbelt rentals or Pawpaw rental, etc., if you have a specific projects where, hey, I could use this piece that attaches to a skid steer, you can go and rent that for the day. It's one of those pieces of equipment that really has a lot of versatility, and the goal would be to replace the the John Deere 4610 with that loader, and I think that it gives us a lot more capability. So the idea here was to update that amount to give us a little bit more leeway. I think with 55, we can still look to see if we could find a used one, but we might even be able to get into more of kind of a base loader tier for a newer one at that range. So I think that gives us enough leeway to be able to figure everything out there and get a piece of equipment that we can really use. And then again, like I mentioned during the discussion in the motor pool fund, the flatbed dually. Now, Jimmy and I've talked about a couple things. I think we could either go with a 1-ton dually truck, similar to what we have now, or there are a couple other different product options we've been looking at that might suffice as well, and might be a little different than our current piece of equipment, but might be able to Jimmy, or would you be able to tell me, go over that at all? I know you and I talked about something possibly other than the dually, but maybe he's not available at any rate. We'll obviously bring this to you guys, but I think the idea here is it would either be a comparable piece of equipment or something that would be a little bit different that would serve the same function. So 65 is what we guessed would be the total there. So then we have a budget summary by fund. Basically, this breaks everything down by fund and by department or revenue category. So you can see our 2021 to 2022 requested budget on the left-hand side. And then as you go to the right, you can see the budget for this year, activity for this year, 2019 and 20, 2018 and 19, etc. So I'll kind of just go over the high level view here. So one thing to note here is that with the beginning fund balance numbers, obviously we're in December now. This budget runs through February, so those are likely going to see some changes. So, for example, as we look at the net revenues and appropriations, that kind of bottom column there, you can see beginning fund balance 649,1791. That comes from the ending fund balance as of 12/31. Of course, as we get through the end of January, middle of February, we're going to see some changes there where that amount's probably going to fluctuate some. So that's kind of the one caveat when you're showing fund balance numbers, is that there are going to be some minor fluctuations that could change things. But what we're going to focus on for the purposes of this right now would be net revenues over appropriations. So with what we forecasted, we would anticipate roughly about $4,249 in revenues over appropriations for the general fund. For major roads, we would anticipate spending $53,625 from our fund balance. Right now, we had roughly about $575,000, so that would leave us with a fund balance of roughly around $520,000. For local roads, we have $49,925 in net revenues over appropriations. The beginning fund balance of 56,000, so that would leave us roughly 106,000. Again, this is one of those areas where we do actually have a CD right now, but that's kind of where what I was talking about, where we may look to do an adjustment early on before this budget begins. So if that happens, obviously we'll adjust this as well. For fire insurance proceeds, we don't ever make any projections there, just because all that is used for is a holding account. Salvage vehicle inspection revenues, again, pretty flat, same from year over year. When we get to streets, you can see now this year we actually have, or the upcoming year, we are estimating an appropriation of $125,000. even with that 125,000, that would still leave roughly 53,000 in net revenues over expenses. With the beginning fund balance right now of about 197, that would leave us with about 250,000 in the streets fund. So I think that's actually really healthy. Gives us a lot of leeway in terms of trying to determine what funds we need to send those to and how that works. I think for road funding in general, we're in a good place as we look out into the future at what we hope to achieve with our pavement asset management plan. For business loan and home loan, home rehab loan revenues, and I guess those funds in general, you can see most of it is fairly similar. We anticipated a bit more principal on loans from the business loans. Obviously, with the most recent approved one, we should see more principal paid back. We'll probably see a bit of an increase in interest also. I'll probably adjust that after this discussion, but you know, again, we're trying to be conservative. We know that there's been, I think with the loan for Mormon, there's a deferral period, so that loan starts in July, so we may not see quite as much of an increase as we might think with interest, but we should still see more principal. We lowered the contingency amount as well because we didn't see a need to have that there. And then we would anticipate roughly $2,600-ish in terms of excess revenue over appropriations. For home rehab loans, we're forecasting no change in revenues over appropriations. So the ending fund balance there would be roughly about the same as it is now with 113,000. The DDA fund, the biggest difference there, I think, is going to be we are forecasting a reduction in property taxes. We looked at property taxes over the last couple of years, and it looked like we were seeing a decrease from where we had been about 3 years ago. Now, this might change with some of the development in the community with, you know, some of the businesses that are now filling into those empty spots that are there, but I'm not sure exactly how that'll play out. So we try to be conservative and just go with the lower amount to try to make sure we were okay there. And then we also reduced the DDA appropriations amount to kind of reflect that reduced property taxes. So there's still 13,000 there for community development, but it's a little bit about $1,200 less than what it would have been last year. And then we get into sewer funds. With all of the projects we're seeing with sewer, we're going to anticipate using about $171,000 of the fund balance. Right now, our sewer fund would have $786,000-ish, just about 787. After we factor in this, that'd still leave us with about 615,000. Again, the biggest reason for that is we're starting to see an increase in the number of projects and the amount of projects for sewer and water in the coming years. So that's to be anticipated. And part of building up those water and sewer fund balances was to help cover these costs that we were going to see over the next couple of years. Now with water, it's actually a little bit different. With water, we're going to see an increase in projects beginning next year. So for this year with water, we're going to be building that fund balance a little bit in anticipation of those projects. So we're anticipating about $82,000 in net revenues over appropriations. And then the ending fund balance for water should be around the 690,000 mark, give or take what might transpire over the next couple months. That number will probably be adjusted a little. Garbage shouldn't really be something that's not a revenue really generating fund for us. The only revenue that comes from that in general would be interest charges from late fees, things of that nature. So the idea is never really to make money. It's really meant more as a holding account. So we have $9,000 that is in the fund now. I believe that actually probably would get spent, but the reason that you see the beginning fund balance number is just because that's what's in the account as of this moment. My guess would be it'll be closer to zero as we get closer to February. So we might have a couple $100, I think is really all that's there from penalties. And then with the motor pool fund, we would anticipate a roughly $24,510 in appropriations that would be more than revenues. So that would, again, reduce the fund balance. We're sitting at roughly about $350,000 with the motor pool fund, and I would anticipate with snow removal efforts, things like that, we'll probably see that amount increase over the next month and a half. So that amount actually probably be a little bit higher, but that would leave us with an ending fund balance of roughly about $333,000 in the motor pool fund. So altogether, that would be a In terms of net revenues across all funds, we would anticipate spending $56,802 more than what we're taking in for revenues. Again, the biggest driver there is our sewer projects. And then again, about a 1.3% reduction across the entire budget. And we would expect to see an ending fund balance of roughly about 3.45 million at the conclusion of fiscal year 22. And then we have a line item budget. So you guys can see in terms of each individual department, what is appropriated where. I do know I saw one correction I need to make. Obviously, when you're looking at the areas that have a bolder border, that's going to be your estimated revenues for the whole fund, appropriations for the whole fund, and then the net amount below. I know in the chart above, so when you're looking at the department level, excuse me, or the fund level, all those numbers are right. But I think there may have been a couple spots, I can't remember exactly where it was, but where I might not have the negative amount there. Just keep in mind, if you see, when you look at the revenues and you see the appropriations, if the appropriation is higher than the revenue, that's obviously a negative and that's going to use fund balance. If this is positive, that would normally indicate that you're going to add to the fund balance. So I know, let me see. I don't know if I can find it, but there was, I think, one where I caught an error. Here, right here, motor pool is a good example. You can see revenues of 164, appropriations of 188. That should actually be a negative. So I'll get that fixed before you guys, before we vote on that next month. Obviously, I have a public hearing as well. And then we have a fee schedule. So this is pretty much the exact same fee schedule we had from this year. I didn't forecast any changes there. We use just the state Bureau of Construction codes for their building permits. The rental costs are the same, miscellaneous, so fence permits, seller's permits, yard sale permits. We aren't forecasting any changes for those either. Then we have a fund department total amount. So this kind of breaks everything down by department and puts it all into one place there where you can see it all. And then this is a sample of the resolution that will pass next month for the budget. Again, it actually breaks down all of those, as you can see on the right-hand side, all of the appropriations for each fund, and then the grand total across everything. So, so with that, does anybody have any questions for me? Obviously, I would encourage everyone to take a look. I know it's a 40-page document, so obviously, if you don't have a question directly tonight, feel free to review those as you get time. And if questions come up, shoot me an email, give me a call and say, hey, Matt, could you explain this? Or hey, Matt, what's going on with that? And I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Okay. Well, you need a drink of water now, Matt.
I know, right?
Okay, the next item on the agenda is unfinished business 2021-2022 council committees.
Yeah, so during the December meeting, we discussed this. We had a discussion on the committees that we would look to appoint. The item was tabled till this month's meeting. I spoke with President Alwire and he proposed some appointments to fill the vacancies. Just to give everybody an idea, that was selected on the list here. The Safety Committee generally meets quarterly. For Parks and Recreation, that liaison meets as needed. Last year, I think there was a grand total of 2 meetings. And then the Loan Committee would meet as needed again as well to review loan applications. That can be as little as 0 or as many as 2 or 3 times. But with most of these committees, you're not talking about a big time investment. But they are critical in helping us make sure that we address those things as they come up. Obviously, safety is a primary driver for everything that we do. Parks and Recreation, having that council person to discuss ideas for parks and what we might look to do to our future and how we enforce the Parks and Rec plan is a big goal. And then the Loan Committee, that would be myself, Kim, Attorney Cooper, and then a council member. So obviously we have to have a way to be able to evaluate those applications fairly as well. So no vote would be necessary for this list. It's provided just for reference unless somebody has an objection to the appointments that were listed here. But I highlighted the changes in yellow. So Charlene would be joining us on the Safety Committee. Jessica would be joining us as the Parks and Rec liaison, and then Janice would be joining us on the Loan Committee.
Any questions? don't we usually vote on this, Matt?
No,
No?
no, I mean,
Okay.
if you wanted to, you could,
No, I'm just curious,
but
it's fine. But I
yeah,
wasn't,
committee appointments are determined by the village
I know,
president, and
I understand, but I thought maybe we voted on them before, but that's okay.
no, I don't think we did last year.
What's going on? Okay. All right. Any thoughts or anything? If there is no questions, then we move on. Okay. Readiness to set. The next item is readiness to serve fees, water/sewer.
Yeah. So last month we discussed this, and there was two issues that came up, and um, in response to that, the village council had elected to keep our existing rates the same way they were and not make any changes. With that, I did receive correspondence again from Ms. Pasley, and she had felt that maybe she had not, her particular concern here had not been discussed as much as she might have preferred. So I'll kind of give just a brief overview again. So with the current rate structure, those ready to serve fees would not be discontinued if a property owner doesn't have services connected. So there's a few reasons why we went to this. The readiness to serve fees are designed to ensure that the village's fixed costs are covered for the operation and maintenance of the systems. So those are costs that we can't defer or redirect, whether that's, maintaining the lines that are there, basic, maintenance services that have to be completed, flushing hydrants, etc. Those are things that we can't just not do. So whether somebody has service or not, we have to do what we can to maintain the integrity of our water and sewer systems. So by charging a base fee like this, we're able to ensure consistent billing for all properties. So if we aren't allowing fluctuations like that, and we can say, okay, we know that we're going to have this base fee across all properties, that allows us to reduce the actual readiness to serve fee to the lowest level possible. If we know that there are going to be fluctuations and we may have a number of residents that leave and aren't paying those fees, generally what ends up happening, especially under the old system, was that we would have had to have made held a discussion on should those readiness to serve fees be even higher. While convenient for property owners to be able to disconnect service, um, it does create issues for us since we do, as mentioned earlier, we still have to maintain all of our water and sewer services, and we have to maintain the capacity to serve that property, even though it's not in use. So if RTS fees were discontinued, we'd more than likely have to either raise the readiness to serve fees slightly for everyone, or look at usage fees to offset those potential losses. As noted above, part of the rationale here too is the capacity in the system. So when a homeowner turns service off, we're not going to charge usage fees for them while they're away or not using the property, obviously. So that's one thing that comes into play here. But we have to make sure that that capacity in the system still exists for when they want to turn service back on. So let's say, for example, across all of the services, we know that we have a certain number of gallons per hour that we have to maintain for all of the services in terms of our pumping capacity, things like that. Well, whether 10 or 12 people have service turned off at any one time or not, we can't reduce our ability to serve that capacity. We have to make sure that we can meet all of those requirements. So that's one of those areas too where that RTS fee comes into play, is making sure that all of the capacity that we need in the water and sewer systems are there for every property. So when they want to turn service back on, it's turned back on and there's no hiccups, there's no issues. We already have everything set for them to adequately serve all of the properties. I did attach the letter from Ms. Pasley for your guys' review. Basically, what she's stating is that her operations involve distressed properties. So in those cases, you're looking at projects that might have significant repair requirements to get them to a point where they can be leased, or repair concerns that might make turning the water on or sewer on not really an option until those repairs would be completed. So say there was a hole in a roof, or there was no windows in a house or something like that. Obviously in those cases, if you can't control the environment inside, you're not going to be able to turn water or sewer services on at that point because pipes could freeze, things along those lines. So what Ms. Pasley was requesting was an exception be made for properties like that to allow for an RTS fee to be discontinued for up to 6 months. Now, I understand the concern. But there's a few things we have to think about when we look at what course to take. As we talked about last month, I reached out to other communities and other village and city managers around the state to figure out how they handled this. In all of those cases, the communities assessed ready to serve fees as we do now. If a connection existed, they charged a fee. If services were off, they didn't charge for usage like we don't either. Baker Tilly, the firm we utilized for helping us with the rate structure, indicated they would advise us against creating exceptions. Outside of the fiscal and maintenance concerns, you also have to determine how do you enforce a provision like that and then do it fairly and consistently. So you have to devise a way to determine who qualifies for that exemption and how long the exemption would be enforced. One of the challenges here is that in most of these cases, you're not utilizing building permits or things along those lines because the work's being done on the interior of the home. So that creates an issue because there isn't some sort of a benchmark that you can peg this to and say, well, as long as this permit is open, we'll not charge this. You're not able to do that. We also don't have the staffing capacity where we could monitor or inspect each exception that might come up. So in a case like this, if you were going to do something, I think some sort of a blanket period might make sense, because I think inspection requirements and stuff on the part of DPW would just be too much to be able to handle. But again, the concern here would be trying to determine what qualifies and how that determination is made. Some projects might only need a month or two, others might require more than 6 months. So that does also then beg the question of, does a predetermined time frame make sense? If this path was desired by the council, the best course of action I can think of where we may be able to look at this fairly would be on a case-by-case basis by the council. Under that scenario, a property owner could bring that to the council and then ask, and then you guys would be able to ask if there's any questions, determine whether an exception would be awarded. That would probably be the most likely course here, to be able to figure out whether this should be whether a change should be made or not. But that's also not detailed in any of our existing ordinances or rate structures to be able to allow for an exception. So we'd have to make a change to accommodate that. And there could be some liability concerns as well. So if council elects to grant one exemption, but not another, there could be an option for litigation to figure out, well, why did you award it to this person and not me? The challenge there is you have to have a criterion of some point of some sort to be able to say, well, this is how we know that this project meets these requirements. And so that's where it starts getting difficult, is that when you look at the number of different projects and different things, it's difficult to determine how you would actually do that. In the end, concerns that are like the ones shared by Ms. Pasley are understandable, and I see where she's coming from. But with any change in water and sewer rate structures like we did, there's going to be some new changes that affect everybody differently. The village's stance on this to this point has been that those fees are designed to cover the fixed cost to maintain the system and the reserved capacity for that property. In communities that utilize the system that we do now, those fees would essentially be considered part of the cost of owning property. When you factor in the challenge in trying to determine how to enforce a fair and equitable system for some sort of exemption, it gets to be really challenging to figure out how do we manage this? How could you manage this effectively? So as recommended by the financial firm, Baker Tilly, and the other area communities I talked to, the best course of action may be to just continue with our structure as is. While we understand Ms. Pasley's concern, an argument could be made that the current system was designed to ensure our long-term viability and the health of our water and sewer systems, and adhering to the current rate structure might just be the best way to do that. However, I do encourage all the council members to share your feedback on this and discuss if you'd like any changes to be made. If there was one, we would have to probably draft a new provision in our rate structure to be able to allow for an exception. How do we determine what qualifies? What length would there be? Who's responsible for determining this, etc. So, by all means, let's talk about it and see what everybody thinks.
Any questions? Discussion?
I do. Okay, so this is Trustee Benson, and I have some thoughts on it. I'm not sure that I'm okay with the whole 6 months. waiving of fees. I think sometimes it's reasonable to do maybe a 90-day. If you can't get it done in a 90-day, maybe from the date you purchase this home or something along the lines, you know, she's buying, if you want to say, I can't think of the word at the moment, but she's buying, you know, bank-owned homes, foreclosure homes, and you do get into a lot of problems where you can't have water and sewer. You know, I think you should be able to get it at least watertight within a 90-day period. Now, if anything goes longer than that, maybe homeowners have an option of you can shut your services completely off, but in order to hook back up to it, you're going to pay a hookup fee. That's done through Consumers Energy and other places where it's a pretty hefty fee to do so. Could be like $250 for a hookup fee. That covers your costs and it makes them happy. So I don't know. I think 6 months is too long. I think 90 days is doable. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, but I don't know. Again, I think it would be a good idea on a case-by-case basis to come to the council and explain what needs to be done. And then we can say, yeah, that sounds like, you know, we'll give you the 90 days. But if it's some minor things, I don't want to, you know, get in the market of just free 3 months for, you know, purchase of your first home. That doesn't seem right either.
Any other discussion?
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I would just add, you know, to Janice's point, you know, that there may be an avenue there, especially with the turn-on fees. Right now, I believe the turn-on fee is $20. We're going to more than likely see a lot less of turn-offs with the way the system works now, but there could be an option there where you could look at a change in a turn-on fee or something if you increase that amount. And roughly the readiness to serve fees for like the base water meter size, you're looking at, I think it's about $30 a month. So for 90 days, you know, you'd be looking at right about $90. So there could be an avenue there where that could make sense. And I think bringing it to the council would be Jimmy and my preference. I don't necessarily feel comfortable with us making the call there. I think if the council were to be the ones to do that, that would make the most sense if we headed that route.
Okay, any other council members, any idea?
I really don't agree with having that fee when people are not using the water. I mean, I understand where it's coming from, but same time, it just doesn't feel right to me.
Okay. Anyone else? See, this is, I have a comment to make is the issue you run into with this, in this, something like this, you know, I mean, just my opinion is, what would you do with those people like they go on vacation to Florida for 3 months, 4 months, and like I have the lady, you know, Helen across the street from me, she's been gone for a year, you know, do you give her a, does that apply to these people who don't stay in the village for 3, 4 months during the winter time? Would you give them exception? Would you go that far, or how does it work?
That's one of the things that comes
Any
up
idea,
is
any discussion?
you kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit, Ali, too, is that's one of those areas where somebody could make an argument where how is that substantially different than,
It's the
you know, in
same,
terms of the
it's the
net
same
effect.
issue, really, if you think about it. It's the same thing. They go to Florida for 3 months and they're not using anything. They're not using the water.
Well, I
and-
think one is a repair and one is you're going out of, you know, you're going to Florida because you're a snowbird.
Yeah,
I
it's,
think there's a big difference there.
yeah, but they still don't use the water. That's what I'm trying to say. They're not using anything. I mean,
That's what I'm thinking too. If you're not using the water, I can't see charging that extra.
that's what Mike's argument is. So, I mean,
Whatever.
I mean, how is it done now when people go to Florida? You're still billing them? I mean, this is a new billing, as in, you know, last few months of how you're doing the ready to serve fees. In the past, it wasn't billed. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think
yes,
this is something new, Janice.
Yeah, the readiness to serve fee would not have been billed before, but at this point, usage is stopped whenever somebody has service disconnected at all. So,
Right.
you know, in any case, whether it's a renovation or somebody going to Florida or something, there's no usage, you know, that the service can be turned off and no usage would be assessed. It's just the base readiness to serve fees. And you know, just keep in mind, if we go the route of changing it for people that go on vacation and this, we're probably going to need to entertain increasing the cost of across the whole board. Or we're going to potentially run into issues with USDA funding also, because that's part of what this comes from, is the rate structure was designed to be consistent with what USDA would be required for us to meet the revenue bonds. If we start making changes, then it's possible we're going to raise the rates of everyone. But I mean, if you guys see fit to do that, then that's fine. We can try to come up with what an alternative would be.
Let's go ahead and make somebody makes the motion, and we have a roll call and see what people want to do. Go ahead. We need a motion. We need somebody to make a motion either way. So we're gonna take a roll call on this. To leave it as to continue with our structure as is, or to do case by case basis, whatever the decision is. I mean, whatever the motion says now, Matt, what does it here? I can see the writing so little I can hardly see it. Can you make it
Well, I
bigger?
mean, it just says if requesting a change, I move to, and whatever the change would be.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion, either whatever they wanted to change? I need a motion.
I would make a move to review on an individual basis the fee that we're charging right now.
Okay, you're talking about like case by case. Okay.
Right.
Need a second. Trustee Baran.
I'll
Need a-
second that.
Okay. Let's have a roll call, Ken, please.
Sorry, trustee Benson,
What are we, I'm sorry. So we're going to do it on a case by case, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
trustee Gunther,
Let's say no.
Pro Tem Jackson,
No,
trustee Mead,
No.
trustee Pelfrey,
No.
trustee Varian,
Yes.
President Elwar.
No. So motion fails. We're
Yes.
gonna see. Okay. Okay. Next item on the agenda is new business. Council rules and proceedings.
Yes. So, as we do every year, we are going to have the rules of proceedings that will get passed next month. But what we typically do, just like we did last year, is to present them to you guys for review going up to that meeting. So if there's any changes, especially if there's something major that somebody wanted to make, we have feedback to be able to do that before we get to the February meeting where these will be adopted. The only thing that I changed, as you look through, I mean, this is essentially the exact same rules of proceedings we had for last year. It's in all of our, council trustee packets, so I won't spend too much time on them. But the only area where I made any change was just at the bottom where it says the right to vote is limited to members of the council present at the time vote is taken. Voting by proxy or by telephone is not permitted. Obviously, for probably a couple months here into 2020, maybe March might be the only meeting where this comes into a play. But I just put except as permitted under Public Act 254 of 2020. So that was passed by the state that allows virtual meetings. So of course, in some instances, some of us may be on the telephone right now. So
Yeah.
I felt it was nice to have that in there just to make sure we had that accounted for. But outside of that, I hadn't personally added any changes. Would anybody from the council have anything they'd like to see differently, or?
I think it looks okay, unless somebody else has any questions.
Okay. I mean, and this, just like with the budget too, I know obviously when you're looking at pages of text, it can be difficult to say, well, what about this or what about that on the spot?
Yep.
So, over the course of the next month, as we lead up to the February meeting, if anybody has any questions or wants to propose something, feel free to email or call me as well, and we can work on that too if anything does come up.
This is a living document anyway, so you can change whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you can change it whenever you want.
Okay, you need a motion on this?
Nope. This was just for informational purposes.
All right. Next item on the agenda, public comments. Any public comments?
And again, for public comments, you would press *9 on your phone or use the raise hand function on the app. I don't see any, Ali.
Okay. Next item is the council comments. I'm gonna go by my list as I see it. And you gotta forgive me because I just have to go through from, according to the headings of for the headings I have in front of me.
Yep.
Trustee Jackson, you have any comments?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Trustee Benson,
Nope.
Trustee Gunther,
Nope.
Trustee Mead,
No.
Trustee Pelfrey,
Nope.
Trustee Varan,
Just thank you to the DPW and the PD. They do a great job.
all right, who else? So the only comment I have, I wish everyone will have a happy new year. And I need a motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Trustee Mead and Trustee Benson. All in favor, say aye.
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 That was Trustee Gunther.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I apologize. You sound the same, Trustee
It's still-
Mead, Trustee
it's still
Gunter.
aye.
I apologize for that. Trustee Mead, Trustee Gunter. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.